Yeah, they wanted me to do this boardwalk talk on Atlantic Beach for the 100th anniversary exhibit that's over in the museum. I don't know if everybody's seen that. And I walked through it and I said, wow, everything's here. I can't even expound on anymore. So basically I went through that exhibit and just found little niches where I can improve some of the stories. So today I'm going to talk about 7 people that fairly well known in Atlantic Beach that you'll quickly come to mind, and little nuggets that I found about them that I didn't know about that's not in the museum. And so I thought I would put that together. So I'm glad everybody turned out. It's very hot outside, so I didn't know what the chapel would be like in here, but it feels pretty decent. So if it gets too hot, I'll just run through this thing. But it's people and places. So basically, it's 7 people in the places. A lot of the places where people are named for, like Jack Russell Park, Johansson Park, things like that, things that you've seen all your life and maybe knew something about it. I just kind of dig a little farther into it. So let's start with Jack Russell Park. And everybody's probably been to Jack Russell. Probably we just went to the market like a week ago. And have you seen this? This is actually the plaque where it is over facing the street right behind. That's been there since 1961. And I didn't know a lot about Jack Russell. I mean, I knew he was the police chief, but I didn't know that he was the character that he was. Like, I had no idea. And so I started digging into him. And it's interesting. Here's where he first gets his police chief badge, because he was the town marshal first. And then when the city became a city in 1957, he became... Oh, sorry, guys. And so in 1957, when the city became a city, then he became a police chief. Before that, he was the town marshal. This is his son, Eddie, who was a policeman in Neptune Beach, pinning on his badge, and then Eddie worked for him before Eddie went over to Neptune Beach. So, do you know what the difference between a marshal is and a police chief or a constable? Because remember, we used to have Jim Jarbo was the town marshal of Neptune Beach. And so what a marshal is they can cross jurisdictions. They can go from one beach to the next. And so that's why back in the day, there were no police chiefs, because basically the city couldn't afford a police chief, but they had marshals. So marshals could be appointed, marshals could be appointed by the judge. And basically Judge Gavigan appointed all the marshals from Mayport. And so everybody was a marshal. They could cross jurisdictions. He could go to Neptune. Jarbo could come over to Atlantic Beach, that type of thing. So that's why he was the marshal for so long. And so he was the marshal from 33 to 57 before he became the chief. And it was basically just him by himself riding around in his police car, night, day, weekends. I mean, that's what he did, and he loved it. I mean, he really did. He had a bunch of boys that loved it, and so I started looking into him. And I don't know if any of y'all know this or not, but before he got into law enforcement, he was a boxer and a wrestler. So he grew up in Athens, Tennessee, which is like a town in between, I want to say, Knoxville and Chattanooga. And his father was a farmer, a pretty well-known farmer in that area. But Jack was a boxer growing up, and so he actually became a professional boxer from like about 1925 to 1927. It says in his obit that he boxed Jack Dempsey, the former world heavyweight champion. So I started looking into that. I know that Jack Dempsey fought a lot of exhibitions against a bunch of all-comers, and Jack might have been one of those, but I couldn't document that anywhere, but it was in his obit. But one of the things Jack did was that as he was boxing, he would also wrestle to stay in shape. And so he realized that he wasn't as good a boxer as he was a wrestler. And so in 1928, he became a wrestler, and he went all over the country wrestling, you know, and and he was good at it. He came to Jacksonville in 1928, and he wrestled downtown in the old armory, and his name was Otto van Grobach, the German ace. And he was the villain. He wore like a mask, and you know, they picked him up and threw him out of the ring. You know, he broke his collarbone, broke his ankles, but he was just this, you know, happy villain. Like everybody loved him, but they knew he was the villain. So they brought him in, and he was very popular downtown in the armory for a couple of years there. And so he couldn't make enough money doing that, so he basically became a substitute policeman in Jacksonville Beach from, like, I would say 29 to 30, and he just, you know, made a little money that way along with, I don't know if he was a sworn officer, I don't know how they did that back then, but that was his deal. And then the city of Atlantic Beach in 31? Let me go back. 33 appointed him the town marshal. And so that was his full-time job. And he still kept wrestling on the side. He wrestled until 1943. He not only wrestled, but he like refereed the matches downtown, and like he just couldn't get away from it. He loved it. Like he was an athlete all his life, and so you can see this, you know, this burly guy. He was about 5'10", weighed about 225. He boxed as a middleweight, so he was like, you didn't want to cross him out on the street. You know, he was gonna go. You know, he was throwing the gloves down. So he was a great town marshal, and stayed in that position until the city obviously incorporated, became a city, and finally promoted himself to that, or promoted him anyway. And that's him that's Jim Jarbo there with the cowboy hat. They were the best of buds. And of course that's Eddie pinning on the badge. That was a story in the Times-Union about a little bit about his wrestling days. There he is in his police vehicle. He also coached boxing at Fletcher in 1942. I didn't know that. I mean, I didn't even know Fletcher had a boxing team, but and there's no 42 yearbook, so I can't verify that. But all his boys went to Fletcher, you know, so he was very interested in anything they did there. And he always dreamed of a city park for local kids. You know, he loved sports. He had 3 boys. Like, he's like, you know, back then there was no park in Atlantic Beach. There was nothing. And so he always dreamed, you know, just like Billy Howe, we'll talk about later, they always wanted a park here in Atlantic Beach. And, you know, he never saw it in his lifetime. You know, they just never got the money for it. Until he passed, and he just, you know, he went into the hospital. He had some issues, a little bit of pneumonia, something about hepatitis, and he passed fairly early. And right away, Jack Russell Park was on the docket for the city to, you know, they got to buy this land. We got to name it after Jack. And this is 1961. This is a picture of his wife and Eddie at the dedication service. 25 years. He served with the city until his death in '62. And of course the park at the end they were still like building the fields, putting in, you know, restrooms, things like that. So it took like another year yet, but that's where Jack Russell Park, and so everybody knows where Jack Russell Park. A lot of people just didn't know who Jack Russell was, and so I was really, it was really fun to just dig down and see who he was and the character he was. There's a tight shot of the plaque. 1933 to 1981, he lived in Atlantic Beach. Here's another name that obviously everybody's heard of, past Adele Grange Cultural Center, Mrs. City Hall. You know, Jack was Mr. Police, she was Mrs. City Hall, and she was as well known as anybody in the city in those days. Grew up in Atlanta. Her father was head of the waterworks in Atlanta. A fascinating man. When I found out, I just dug into his little ancestry and stuff. But her father was the head of the Atlanta waterworks, like in Chinatown. You know, Mr. Monroe, that you know was the head of the waterworks in L.A. and the whole Chinatown thing. He was like Mr. Monroe of Atlanta, and like he ran the water department for like 40 years. He was like just, you know, the mayor's right-hand man. And you know, water, back in those days, that was a big deal. Water, you know, electricity was big, but water was bigger. And so she never went into city government or anything. She was a beautician when she moved here in 1938 with her husband. He was a World War I veteran, and he was general manager of a B.F. Goodrich tire store here in Jacksonville. So they moved down from Atlanta, and he took over a couple tire stores. And so, you know, he had his job, and they had 2 boys, and she was a beautician. And so in 1941, she reads an ad in the paper for a part-time bookkeeper, fire and police dispatcher, and driver's license registrar. All those things, you know. Like, who's going to take that job? You know, right? You know, but she's like, okay, you know, my dad worked in city government for 40 years, civil servant. You know, it's like, it's in my blood. I can do this. And she was good at it because she did it for 38 years. She was Mrs. City Hall. And, you know, that's the same building that's up there on 7th Street. I mean, you can see the same architecture. You know, they haven't really changed much of the front. The door is the same. Obviously, those little those columns I don't think are there, but like that's her outside the city hall. So that was the city hall from I don't know exactly when that picture was taken, but that was the city hall. I think since when it burned in 1932, and the original one burned where One Ocean is in 1932. But she was indispensable. And she, you know, after 3 years on the job, they made her town clerk. About 3 years, she did all that stuff, and finally she was the town clerk. And she joined Jack Russell and the city clerk, or Jack Russell and one other, I think one other person on the city, and that was it. There was only like 3 people in the city office. You know, how many people are there now? Who knows, right? But back then, when Adele was there, 3 people. So in 44, she actually becomes the town clerk. And that's her when we saw that we got this in the Beaches Museum archives. I'm thinking this is Ocean Bank, when Ocean Bank first opened. And I think that's the bank president, but she's coming over, you know, blessing the place, I'm sure. You know, like, you'll be dealing with me soon. And she lived right across the street from City Hall on 7th Street. Like right across the street. And, you know, Lee Chateau was right on the ocean there, so that was a popular corner, you know, with City Hall and everything. And her boys went to Atlantic Beach Elementary when it first opened. I mean, she remembers coming down here from Atlanta before they moved here. She would come down, you know, with her parents to summer in Atlantic Beach. And she remembers going down Atlantic Boulevard, and it was a 1-lane road with sand on both sides. And if a car came down, you had to pull off the road, let that car come, and you had to pull back onto the road. There were like 400 people when she moved here in 38. You know, it was just that small of a town. And when her dad retired, and they moved down here, and her parents lived here in Atlantic Beach for their last couple of years, and so they loved Atlantic Beach. That was her town. And she died in her home, 32 years as the city clerk, retired in 72, died at her home at 2214 7th Street. I don't know if there's a house there. I don't know what's there now, but moved here in 38, and she was a member of Baptist Church. She was like the president of everything. Every garden club, anything you think about in not just Atlantic Beach, but Jacksonville Beach, any kind of civic women's group, she had been the president of it. And I'm like, I don't know where this woman got this energy, but she did it all. And survived by 2 sons. And she's buried in Greenlawn because I just found her marker. And this is right outside Adele Grange. When you walk in, right past that entrance where the restrooms are, there's a plaque for her that they put in 2002 when they redid that building, and they changed the name from obviously the town hall to the cultural center. So, I mean, I was a reporter at the beach for 26 years and I always heard about Adele Grange, but I just never knew who this woman was, and just incredible legacy that she left for Atlantic Beach as a public servant. All right, have you seen this historical marker across from the Neptune Beach Lifeguard Station, and it's right in front of One Ocean at the end of Town Center? Has anybody seen this? Okay, I'm sorry. Let me get the right slide up. Have anybody seen this? So my wife and I, we saw this I want to say in December, and I'd never seen it because her son was a Neptune Beach lifeguard for 7 years. And so I'm like, who's this guy? Town Marshal Paul Patrick. And so I was like, oh, this guy's got to be part of my presentation. I got to find out. So Paul Patrick was Atlantic Beach's first town marshal. Wrong. Born in Savannah, Georgia, listed at age 21 in the U.S. Army and served 3 years. Kind of right. After his discharge, worked for the Chatham County Police Department in Georgia, correct, and later as a Savannah police detective. And then in 1920, wrong, moved with his wife and 4 children to Jacksonville, where he worked in the grocery business, correct. And then in January 32, the newly established town of Atlantic Beach appointed him as town marshal. Well, actually, they had town marshals before that. Charles Reed, who was a town marshal in 1927, was murdered, was shotgunned to death while he was driving through Atlantic Beach back in the Prohibition days, and they found him dead in his car. What had happened is that he was just getting ready to swear out a warrant for some bootleggers and 25 cases of whiskey that he had found, and the bootleggers killed him. And so there had been town marshals before Marshal Patrick, so not sure why they put that up there. But his duties included serving on the night watch. He was also served as town marshal for Neptune Beach and Manhattan Beach. And remember what I said about town marshals, how they cross jurisdictions. So he was pre-Jarbo. So Jarbo came in 33 for Neptune Beach after Neptune Beach became a city, or basically a town first, then a city. And so he was covering, Neptune, Atlantic, just like Jack did later on. And so on the night of September 10th, 32, in what was the original Atlantic Beach City Hall, which is where One Ocean was. I didn't know that. The original Atlantic Beach City Hall was right there. and it caught fire. And Marshall Patrick became trapped inside the building and suffered severe burns. Now, I don't know if he was in there asleep. We don't know exactly what happened. The fire destroyed, obviously, the town hall, all the city records. The building was reconstructed and torn, and the town hall offices were relocated. I'm thinking to where Adele Grades is now. So that would have been 32-ish, something like that. And records of the fire after his death are clear that Marshall Patrick died during the performance of his duties, and in 2003 his name was added to the National Law Enforcement Memorial in Washington, D.C. And he was a big guy. He was a big burly guy. He had been a grocer on the west side. He owned a grocery store. I'm not sure, he might, same thing, like Adele Grades might have answered an ad, they needed a town marshal. I know he had a wife that had some breathing problems, so I think they wanted to move to the beach, thinking that, you know, the salt air would be better, you know, so that's why he came. He only served 8 months when he died in the fire. 2 guys actually went in to the burning building and dragged him out. I think he just had a lot of smoke inhalation, but he also was burned pretty bad on his hands. And so they had pulled him out, and then he died in the hospital a couple of days later. And so I don't want to embarrass the city, but literally I found a lot of mistakes on this, and then I found this. And that's him in Chatham County there. It's a big guy. Okay, let me go back. So then I found this. So it's the 1910 census. And I'm on I've got an Ancestry subscription, Find a Grave, you name it, I'm doing it, newspapers.com. And I'm like, okay, I'm trying to find out when he was the police detective, when he was this and that, just because I know I'm going to do this story. And there's a Paul M. Patrick, prisoner in the United States Penitentiary as a stonecutter in 1910. He's also from Georgia. His parents are from Georgia. He's 22. Everything lines up. I can't be, you know, totally exact on this. But what it is that he did go into the Army. He served in what was called the Coastal Artillery. There was a lot of coastal artillery up and down the southeast back during World War I. But this is pre-World War I. So he got in at 18 in 1917, and then he got out in 1919. I think it might have been 1916 to 1919. And then this Paul M. Patrick, from Georgia, 22, everything lines up, is a stonecutter in Fort Leavenworth. And I just thought it was fascinating. And what it is before Fort Leavenworth became a prison, it was a military penitentiary barracks. And they used the prisoners in the barracks to build Fort Leavenworth. And so, I don't know if this is the right guy, but I mean, everything lines up. But that's the kind of, so he must, and this is 1910, he moves to Jacksonville in 1916, not 1920. He's a stevedore, which is a longshoreman, and he's working out of Baltimore, but he lives here. And then he becomes like an insurance agent, and then he buys the grocery in the 1920s. And for some reason, that's how he before that, he must have done a couple of years in Georgia as a law enforcement guy, then comes here, you know, does the grocery, wants to get back in law enforcement, and he does, and just tragically dies 8 months into his last law enforcement career. But 2 men broke down the door to rescue him. He had suffered burns on the upper part of his body. He was taken to St. Luke's Hospital, which is not the St. Luke's that we know of today on South Side, but the one which is what UF is now, downtown. where he died from his burns. Another weird thing that I found, that his son, like 3 years later, was charged with armed robbery in Philadelphia and did 10 to 20 in a state penitentiary in Pennsylvania. So I don't know if it was like father like son situation there, but I mean, it's just interesting. I don't know. I can't prove any of this other than what I found, but I thought it was just fascinating. But enough of him. So the Reverend William Halsey Jordan. You know where Jordan Park is in Atlantic Beach? A lot of people probably don't know, but it's on the other side of Mayport. You know, a lot of people know where Donner Park is, and that's much bigger park. This is a little 1 acre park on the other side of Mayport, the ocean side, butts up against Atlantic Beach Country Club, back in there, very small park. That's named after the Reverend William Halsey Jordan, who was a World War I veteran, which is very unique because many African Americans did not serve overseas. He did. He served overseas in France with a African American unit, and then he's from Georgia, and then came back and settled in Florida, organized the Jordan Chapel CME Church in 1959. That's on the Donner side of Mayport Road. Very small church, is still there. And then his wife, Margaret, operated a daycare center at the chapel until her death in 1990. And that was an integrated daycare. They had a daycare center right there. This would be behind whatever the street is where Beaches area, or Beaches Memorial Park is. Is that Main Street? That's Main Street. So it was right off of Main Street is where the church was, the daycare center, and it was integrated even in the late 60s, early 70s, because it was government subsidized. So they had integrated. She ran an integrated daycare, which was, you know, very unique in those days, and just devoted to their community. He was the president of the Beaches Ministry Alliance. He was the president of the Black Chamber of Commerce at the beach. He was just extremely well known in the African American community in that part of Atlantic Beach. And he is buried in Beaches Memorial Park. And then this is the park located at the corner of Francis and Jackson, dedicated in 1987. And while he was a preacher, he was really one of the really first people that really went to the city commission and really said, we need a park in the Donner area. And he was one of those civic advocates that really pushed for Donner Park. And I think Donner Park is actually named after a commissioner, if I'm not mistaken, but Reverend Halsey was a big reason that Donner Park is there today. And so in '87, the city named Jordan Park after him. Funny story, my son went to school, Jets Creek, one of his guidance counselors is here, and one of his buddies who lived here at the beach on off Mayport Road, he used to play football in Jordan Park. And he would come over to our house and play football with my son. And Jordan Park, it's a tough area. If you've ever been over there, it's a tough place. And he would catch the ball and run. He would just throw his arms like this, like at anybody trying to tackle him. And we were all like, whoa, 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 what's this? And he goes, this is how we play in Jordan Park. And I'm like, wow. It's like, all the other kids were like, whoa. You know, so that's, you know, Jordan Park is no joke. Like a lot of Fletcher football players, they come out of Jordan Park and they're good.
Billy Howe. Everybody knows Billy Howe, right? I mean, if you've lived here long enough, you had to know Billy Howe because he was the mayor forever. I mean, he was the mayor 3 times. I mean, he was the mayor from, I'll quickly go to his record, but he was known as the city's perennial mayor. 1957 to 1963, 1965 to 1981. He was undefeated from 65 to 81. I mean, and then 83, I think 86 is wrong because I think it should be 88. Perennial mayor. He was great for the city. And let me back up and tell you a little bit more about him before we get into his mayoral career. He was the son of a Jacksonville restaurant owner who was famous. He was a famous caterer and restaurant owner in downtown Jacksonville. This is Harry Howe. He was a clarinet player, played all over the country, and then came to Jacksonville in 1910. He used to be in those minstrel shows. He played clarinet, but he wasn't part of the minstrel show. You know, if you know anything about minstrel shows, were white actors that dressed up in blackface, and that was the thing. That was what they did. You know, that was before vaudeville. Minstrel shows were like, that's where you went to see theater and stuff like that. So his dad wasn't in the show, but he was a clarinetist with the orchestra. Got out of that, came to Jacksonville, started a 4-stool lunch counter in the back of a cigar shop on Main Street, and built that into the largest catering company in the Southeast. He lived on Riverside Avenue in like a 5-story, I won't say it's a mansion, but it's still there today. It's a very big house, 2 blocks from the river, very wealthy, very renowned. And so in 1954, Preben and Nina Johansson purchased it. And Preben used to go by the name Joe. That was his nickname, Joe. And so this couple met in Germany in 1947 or 1946. Preben, who owned Le Chateau from 1954 to 1982, was from Copenhagen, Denmark. So he was in the Danish Navy in World War II. Nina, who lived in St. Petersburg, went to high school in St. Petersburg, and then became a stenographer in a hospital in St. Petersburg in 1945. She got a job in Germany, a government job with what was called the Civil Censorship Department. And what they did is, after the war in 1945, this department, one was deployed to Japan, and one unit was deployed to Germany, and they would read all the correspondence of the German people, whatever they could find, and they were looking for any Nazis, anybody that was trying to go back into public life before we found it, before we put them on trial and stuff. So she got a job to go to Germany, mail, things like that, look through correspondence, because she had been a secretary at the VA hospital in St. Pete, and that's where she met her husband, Preben, who was an officer in the Danish Navy. And they met there in Germany. She came back to the U.S. They got engaged. She went back to Copenhagen. They got married in 1948. And then they came back to Florida because she was from St. Pete. And then they settled in Jacksonville. And Preben he didn't speak a lot of English, so he had to learn the language. He started as a dishwasher for the Adib family with their old the Green Turtle restaurant on Phillips Highway. Worked his way up to a general manager at Adib's major restaurant, the Sea Turtle. And then in '54, they bought Le Chateau, which had gone through a few hands from 50 to 54 after Hayden Crosby died. And they put in the piano bar in 1970. Jean Nordin, who was a musician from Atlanta, came down for a short, like maybe 3-4 month stint, and loved it so much, he was there for the next 12 years, 6 nights a week, you know, on the piano bar. Liberace went there. A lot of notable people that would pass through Jacksonville would always eat at the Lee Chateau. There was nothing like it. There was no building like it. You know, there was no nightclub like it in Jacksonville. Just because of the way the Crosby had built that mansion, that had a sweeping staircase and just beautiful accoutrements all through it. And not only was Johansson, you know, a restaurateur, but he wanted to give back to the country that he ended up, you know, becoming a citizen for. And so he served 12 years on the city commission for Atlantic Beach. And then another, I just want to live out my last days here at Atlantic Beach and go from there. And he ended up dying like I think a couple weeks later. Just really, you know, it just hit him really, really hard. And then in 1983, they dedicated Johansson Park in his memory, and that's just a beautiful park. I guess it was part of Selva Marina at that time. Selva Marina owned it, and when he died, you know, there was negotiations between the city and Selva, and it actually it's. I looked at the sign. It actually says like Parkway. It actually says Preben Johansson Parkway. So I guess that whole area, those streets around it and everything, that's all part of Johansson Park. Just a beautiful park. I always wondered, never knew really the entire story about him, but he lived the American dream and was very civic minded. Ike McBride. Has anybody heard this name, Ike McBride? And unless you read my story for last Memorial Day, not 2026 but 2025, when I did a story on a merchant marine from Mayport who died in a U-boat attack in 1942. He was the grandson of Ike McBride, and Ike McBride was probably the first and maybe the only African-American shrimp boat owner and seafood. He had his own, not seafood shop, but he had his own where he, you know, cut all the bait, did all the when the shrimpers came off, did all that. He had that from probably 1914 up until probably right until his death. And so owned, best remembered, largest fish house. That's what it is. So he owned a fish house. And so you know where the King House is in Mayport? His fish house was right across the street. And so he owned one of the largest fish houses in Mayport called the Old Reliable Fish Market. He came to Mayport in 1914. Back then, there were plenty of shrimpers, 100 shrimp boats. There's only one African American boat, the Captain Ike McBride, and that was his boat. During the winter, when there were no shrimp, he ran a wood yard. You know, he had an ice house where back then the refrigerator had ice, so blocks of ice, took the ice around, did all that stuff. And he was a lot like Reverend Jordan, very, very well known in the African American community in not only Mayport but Atlantic Beach as well, because he grew up. He lived in the unplanted, what they call the unplatted, colored part of Mayport, but then moved off of that, and then a lot of the streets like Robert Lewis, we'll get to Robert Street, Edna Street, Mary Street, all those streets off of Mayport. Edna and Mary are named after his daughters, and I'm not sure about Robert, but this is his son Tony, and Tony had a well-known seafood restaurant off of Mayport Road for many years, really up until about 1975. He was the general manager of the Prudential Insurance Company cafe or cafeteria downtown in the big building, which is Baptist now. He had worked there, worked for his father in the fish house, and then opened up his own restaurant. It was very well known. And Lewis Street, you know where the pie heaven is? You know where the pie ladies? So that's Lewis Street, and that's who it's named after. It's named after Ike Lewis. Probably passed it many times, didn't know that. And a lot of this history is across the street from the museum at the Rhoda Martin Center. That's where they have this oil painting. And yeah, the fish house is not there. That's an empty lot. And I think I just read like a couple weeks ago, they're starting to develop that lot. Somebody's coming in doing something. I don't know if it's a city or I think it is something to the extent that they're gonna put docks and all kind of stuff there. So, but that was his historical dock. And Lewis Fish Company, those ads used to run in the local papers, a lot of the Jewish papers, things like that. He ran all his ads in that. And he lived until 1956. And that's it. Any questions? I mean, I could talk forever about Atlantic Beach, but I just wanted to get the top things that I thought everybody would know. And if you didn't know, you learned a little bit of something today. Any questions or comments? Thanks for y'all for coming out. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, thank you guys.
Johnny, can you turn the slide so the survey's up there? Can you turn the slide to the next slide?
Oh, we got one more slide.
If you guys could please do the survey, we would
If
really
you could-
appreciate it.
If you can, if you have a smartphone and you want to take a picture of the QR code to take a survey for the museum, just talking about the presentation or whatever, go ahead.